Exposition, an LMC Experience original podcast. Hey, welcome to the Exposition podcast. I'm your host, Micah. T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland is an incredible poem, and you should totally read it right now, Sims. And I'm here with my co-host, T.
What's up?
And we have a very special guest. We have English professor L.D. Green. What's up?
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Is there any special pronouns you want us to use before we get into the interview?
They, them.
Okay, cool. Just want to be...
Yeah, thank you for asking.
Alrighty. My first question is, how'd you get into English?
How did I get into English? You know, that's funny because actually my mom and stepdad were English professors, and I was like, no, I'm not going down that path. But and so when I went to undergrad, I was like an American culture major, and my two focuses were theater and sociology because I wanted to do theater for social change. And then I got out of college, and then I started getting into playwriting because that's what my senior thesis was in college, was a play I wrote and directed. And then I was like, yeah, playwriting, and I did more of that. And then I was like, this is kind of stale and boring. And so I got into slam poetry, and I was like really big into that. And then I was like, and that just became this passion. So I followed that into a creative writing program. So I got an MFA in creative writing. And then after that, it was like, hi, graduate degree in, it was English and creative writing. So it was like graduate degree in English and creative writing. What are you going to do with that? So, I followed into teaching. But, I mean, I've always been, like, a bookworm, and I like all those things, but I never imagined myself necessarily being in the discipline of an English professor until, like, I started following my own, like, creative self-expression.
Awesome. Where'd you go to school for English as well?
So undergrad I went to Vassar College in New York, and then grad school I went to Mills in Oakland.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right. What do you think if we want to talk about literature with you, do you want to talk about literature with them?
I love talking about literature.
Yeah.
All right. Like, what type of, what's your favorite genre of literature? And we'll go, like, get more specific in there.
Genre. Okay, so do you mean, like, genre, like, fiction, poetry, or, like, genre, like, science fiction, fantasy, or...
Start with the medium and then get into the specific, like...
I'm really into graphic novels. I love graphic novels.
It's just going to be a repeat of Tuesday's conversation.
Oh, no.
Who did you talk to on Tuesday?
We talked to Noah Cannon. He's one of the writers on the Experience right now, but he's also...
he's in my myth, fantasy, and science fiction class right now.
Yeah, he also is an author, and we talked about graphic novels for like at least 5 minutes in that podcast.
Oh, nice. Yeah, okay, I can build on that. Right on.
I'm going to put it in the room, okay? Because I still have this beef with T, okay?
Oh, God.
And that Watchmen is the best graphic novel of all time, in my opinion.
I'm gonna stand with you on that.
Oh,
okay,
wow.
Let's go, baby.
I'm just gonna, like...
Let's go.
I guess the reason I have this...
formally. Like, I have issues with his content, which I think maybe I could, but as a form, it's like...
Actually,
perfection.
that is a good point to make, because I think content-wise, I think it's one of the best, like contextually speaking. But I don't know. Like I'm a big comic person, so I've read a lot of graphic novels that end up being turned into or comics that end up getting turned into graphic novels. Like Born Again, I think that's one of the best.
I don't know that one.
It's based off a series of Daredevil comics where he dies and then he gets nursed back to health by his mother, who's a nun, but he doesn't know it's his mother. So it's a very interesting story, and it deals a lot with like Catholicism.
I love it.
Yeah, exactly. And his relation to it, his struggle with it, being a superhero.
I love religious stories.
It's a very interesting graphic novel, but I think that's my favorite. But Watchmen, like contextually speaking, what it's trying to say, I think is my favorite.
Okay. What do you like about Watchmen?
I think what I like about Watchmen is that, like, again, I think the art is inherently political, and and something that's, like, overtly, like, political and has something to say is definitely more interesting than something that doesn't have anything to say. When I read, I think I remember the New 52 of, like, Batman, and actually, I think it was Catwoman that I read.
Yeah.
I was like, I like the stories, again, it's, like, fun characters, but I think that it's just I don't see a overarching message.
Oh, it is brilliant in its messaging. Here, let me clarify what I meant by form, like what the formal content thing. Like, I think, like, if you read Watchmen, like, the image and image and text relationships, like all of the like quote, like the Nietzsche quotes at the end of like, I know you're the philosophy club person, so you know about that, but like the Nietzsche at the end of the chapters, and like the way that it's just like the symphony of it is just like brilliant. And I will say, like, from a feminist perspective, it kind of pisses me off. Like, I feel like the role of the Silk Spectres in that is, like, super problematic. And so I used to read it a lot and love it for its anti-Cold War message, for its philosophy, for, like, what is good, what is evil, like, all this deep, deep stuff. I was just like, yeah! And then I, like, kept reading it, and I was like, oh, it's got some feminist stuff that, like, makes me a little bit cringy.
For sure.
I think part of why I like it contextually speaking for its messaging and all of that is because the way it portrays something like Silk Spectre, it kind of overtly tells you that this is bad. Like, it tells you that everything about it is wrong and that this is obviously a very problematic scenario. And like the way it's displayed, is like very vulgar. It's very uncomfortable. And like if you don't want to see that, by all means, it's gonna be way more than anyone wants. But I think it has something to say that it gets glossed over in that kind of uncomfortable and kind of disgusting bubble that it creates.
That's really well said. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's definitely like a for effort on Alan Moore's part for trying to like advance a feminism, but I think it like still kind of replicates that.
Yeah, and especially
putting that in the culture in a way that is uncomfortable.
Yeah, and especially with more modern takes on it, I feel like it definitely falls behind in contemporary terms. But I think every other part of the messaging, like the anti-American stuff, the anti-Cold War stuff, I think it's very poignant, and it's still like it's one of the best in that regard to this day.
It's very relevant.
I agree with that. I know on the back of my copy it says Watchmen is peerless. I don't know if I got picked up by the mic, but
I think at least to like back on your like what's the feminism part. I mean, I find like because one of my favorite I don't really like the novel as much, but the movie of American Psycho, I think is inherently feminist.
Yikes! Really?
Yeah.
I didn't see that. And I think that's the question of like what media do I choose to consume, of like kind of to your point of like if it's going to upset me, like do I want to, even though I'm like I understand that the message is like could even be radical, but like the experience of consuming it can be so unpleasant to someone that like is living in this experience as like a marginalized gender. Like, do I really want to like undergo that process? But I remember I had a friend in undergrad who wrote their thesis about American Psycho. So it was exactly that. Like, so I support that reading. I just don't want to consume it myself.
I don't know. And also, like, I think it's because I remember there's another really, like, very infamous, like, I think, like, book and movie called Sallow, 120 Days of Sodom.
I don't know that one.
Yeah, don't worry about it. But it's kind of like, it uses, like, these, like, things that are, like, makes you feel uncomfortable in order to, like, prove that what they're saying is wrong. And I think that's the same thing with, like, American Psycho, and especially with Watchmen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. I guess, well, then that goes to questions of, like, taste, right? Like, I think to some degree it's like, okay.
Like, is it done tastefully? Is this something that appeals to my taste? Is this something that I want to consume? That kind of thing?
Yeah. That's, like, a piece of it, and then it's, right, because we don't want to get, obviously, into a position where we're, like, I think, and that gets to a place of like cancel culture, like saying like this does it wrong, so we shouldn't consume it. I'm doing air quotes for everybody on the podcast. So like, right. So there's nothing wrong with consuming a thing that might be more alarming to certain readers, but then there's also just the like decision to not partake in something if it's too unsettling. It's a complicated question. It kind of came up in my class this semester in myth, fantasy, and science fiction, where I taught a book called Future of Another Timeline. And it was kind of like, it's by Annalee Newitt, this non-binary science fiction writer, and they were writing about, it's hard to explain, but basically like kind of a Handmaid's Tale thing, but it was like various timelines, and they were trying to, so this group of women and non-binary folks were trying to prevent this horrible Handmaid's Tale future from happening by editing the timeline. So it's a cool book, but there was a lot of graphic stuff in it that really unsettled some people, you know, and this is from a non-binary person writing it. So I think some of those arguments you can say like, oh, well, Alan Moore, or I don't know who the identity of the author of American Psycho, but you might be able to say like, oh, this cis man, quote unquote, shouldn't be writing about this, and that's why I find it troubling. Mm-hmm. But even from someone who's from a marginalized position themselves writing about it, they can write in an unsettling way, and that can be, I don't know, am I teasing this out? Do you see what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying.
I think the thing is that is it done in a way that is constructive in what it's trying to say? Like, is the message getting across to the reader in a way that they're reading it and they're going, okay, this bad thing that's happening is happening because A, it's inherently bad, and B, because it needs to happen in order for maybe not just the plot, but also the central thesis to take place.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, if you're doing, say, you know, it's a novel about, like, I don't know, a revolution. You need to depict the revolution in full. You need to depict that there will be bloodshed if you want it to be an armed conflict. You know what I mean? Like, stuff like that's going to happen no matter what. Mm-hmm. So how do you do that in a tasteful way that's engaging for readers while also being representative of what you're trying to depict?
Yeah. Those are hard questions.
I think it also gets into, like, the idea of exploitation in, like, especially media. I think, I'm trying to think of a great example for you.
I mean, the Silk Spectre stuff, I think, is a decent enough example. Like, her entire character is kind of the exploited woman in this, you know.
Except I think that Alan Moore had a point with it.
Yeah, but he did, for sure.
But I'm just saying, I think that's an example of it. I can't think of like a bad example off the top of my head though.
I was thinking more like some like I think of the comic book and also manga because manga is a comic book as well, right? Mm-hmm. Berserk.
Don't know that one either.
It's like overly violent and overly like it shows a lot of like rape in it for no real good reason unless just to say like just for shock value. That's just on the point of exploitation, right? Mm-hmm.
I think that's the key thing, and that speaks to T's earlier point is like what's the purpose of that? Like if you have a novel about revolution or if you have a novel about the sexual oppression of marginalized genders, like if you're gonna have violent scenes in there to like make your point. Yeah. Or to your point, are you doing it just for shock value? Yeah. Which is exploitative and which is a problem. So like making those distinctions, I think, can be challenging.
You know what's a good intersection of the two like opposing sides of that spectrum? Game of Thrones.
Oh God.
Because Game of Thrones will have some of the most poignant, like brutal scenes, like Grey Worm, for example. His entire arc of just being, you know, a guy without genitalia. That's you know, that's a thing done in a
about that subplot.
A meaningful and constructive way while also being graphic. But then that show and books too just have a lot of unnecessary filler nudity and stuff, and it's like you don't really need it. Like it's not constructing any form of plot. It's kind of just showcasing like this is how they live, but you don't really need to see it to know it's happening either. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've definitely read and heard critiques of Game of Thrones to say that it was on the spectrum of exploitation. It was on the spectrum of shock value and unnecessary suffering for like the cis women characters and stuff.
But I think that also exploitation, at least inherently, is also not inherently a bad thing because if you look at something like blaxploitation,
right, or
something like I think there's something in like the early '80s with the people that were LGBTQ plus, especially. I can't really remember I think there's something like that, right? Am I crazy? I might be going
Gaysploitation?
Gaysploitation. Something like that. I feel like there's something like that. I don't know if I've heard
of it. I don't know.
You should look it up. I think it's interesting. But I think that there's to get like people included, like especially like, you know, to shock people like, oh my gosh, there's a black person on screen.
Right.
I mean, I think
there is power in shock value for sure. And to the extent to which these conversations can be intersectional, I think maybe there's a limit to all of the intersections.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And I guess that's another interesting thing. Like, where do you start drawing those lines? You know what I mean? Like, when is the inclusion of something, whether exploitative or not, too much of a thing? You know what I mean? Like, can you have too many intersections? Is that even possible?
Can you have too many intersections?
Yeah, like, is that a thing you can do?
Why would that? I mean, there's people who live their lives with many intersections. So.
But that's what I mean. But in narratives specifically, when you're talking about when you want to sit down and write something, and you're like, okay, I want these people, I want these actions, I want these messages. Can you have too many of those? Like, is that?
Well, I think that can be a separate question. Well, it's hard to separate form from content, but I think at the same time, it is necessary when you're crafting something to have some level of focus, right? Or else your message becomes diffuse and you lose your audience because you're doing too many things. Maybe. Yeah. I don't know.
I had a better way to word that in my head, but then it came out and I was like, I don't know if I worded that correctly. But no, it's an interesting thing to me because there's a lot of necessary exploitation that happens in creative works, right? Like you said, blaxploitation, especially stuff like, for example, after gay marriage became legalized, you saw a lot of gay characters in network TV shows and movies and stuff.
Right.
And it wasn't something that was necessarily done to exploit, but it was definitely something like, this is something that people are going to see more in society now, and then you saw those works adjusting to that kind of social, not norm, but I guess it's a norm, like, it is a thing that now happens, and then people wanted to make it more relevant in their work.
Yes.
And I guess it's one of those things where, like, how much of that will a reader or a watcher be willing to consume, especially, like, in America of all places. I feel like there are a lot of people who draw the lines at, like, sexuality and gender, and they're like, okay, that's it, that's all I can do. Or, like, racial diversity, they only have so much of a quota they can get to before they, I don't know, like, mentally check out. I feel like a lot of people have that limit in there.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. I think that there's like, Are you thinking of just like, I mean, but like this imaginary American audience member, like there is a range, right, of people and different experiences. Is there a show you're thinking of in particular that speaks to these questions?
Not necessarily, but it, like, shows like Blackish come to mind.
Okay.
Where it's like it's overtly trying to do a thing. It's overtly trying to be about a central topic, but that topic is done in a way that is, you could argue, exploitative just because of the nature of it. The title alone.
Like TLC? Right.
Yeah, exactly. TLC. Like TLC just as a
like the 90s
channel.
R&B band?
Oh, no. Have you heard of a 90 Day Fiancé?
Yes, maybe.
Don't watch it; it'll melt your brain.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's complete. It's complete.
I watch trash reality dating shows. That's like a guilty pleasure.
Or something like MILF Manor.
Oh, that's awesome.
Have you heard of MILF Manor?
No.
It's a show where a bunch of middle-aged moms, and I mean middle-aged as in like their late 40s, early 50s. I think the oldest one was like 60 or something.
She was 60, yeah.
Yeah, and then their 20-something-year-old sons. And the objective of the show is to get sons to pair with different moms.
Oh my God, that's so disturbing.
And it's the most exploitative thing on the planet.
It's awesome. I don't know what you're talking about.
Like, the sons are super uncomfortable the whole time, even though they're trying to, like, bang each other's moms.
Oh,
and then the moms are just really
horny.
For no reason. Like,
it is, like, so dark. Wow.
Yeah, but, like, is that... Like, that's something people watch, but also why do they watch it? Like, what's the substance to it? What's the allure of something so inherently, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, MILF Manor and Blackish seems like two very different conversations, so I'm trying to decide. But, like, MILF Manor, wow. I don't know. Well, that whole conversation, what's the fascination with trash reality TV? That's a whole conversation. Like, I definitely, I watched Love is Blind. I was too deeply into the Bachelor Nation. It's just, it's embarrassing. But it was like pandemic guilt. I don't know what's happening.
You Want to Marry Harry? Have you heard of that one?
No, I don't know that one.
Oh,
no, that one's another banger where a guy faked being Prince Harry, and then he was on a fake reality dating show, but it wasn't fake. Like, he was going on dates with these women, but they thought he was Prince Harry the whole time.
Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just, one of the worst things. Like, because then at some point he has to come clean, and you're just like, oh God, he's got to do that.
I think that's also kind of illegal. And now that I think about it, to have sex with someone under false pretenses, right? Well, that's rape, right?
But he didn't. I don't think. Wow. I don't think he did. I think the most he did was kiss that one girl, and that was it. And then that was I think it was the season finale or something. I could be wrong, but stuff like that where it's inherently exploitative for the sake of audience appeal.
Right.
Why?
Sensational.
Yeah, but it's sensational in the I guess dirty way would be the way to put it.
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Whew. I guess just this. I don't know. I think it kind of comes from some of the really, I don't know, I don't know where it comes from in human nature. I don't know. Just wanting to laugh at other people's pain, wanting to, just be. That's the only thing I can think of. Is it? I don't know. That's a great question. Is watching reality television calling on the worst of our natures? Maybe. I don't know.
I think personally, at least me as a philosophy major, I think everybody's inherently evil.
Really?
No one is a. I know, right? Crazy. Anyways, I don't believe anybody is good. Why do you think you don't look away when there's going to be two train cars crashing into each other, right?
Can I just assert that I don't think every philosophy major thinks that, right?
No, of course.
Okay, good. Because you said it as a philosophy major, I figured it out. I was
No. Of course not. I'm still figuring out my stuff, okay?
Okay.
But I think that when people watch something on TV, some of the movies I like, when I watch a Quentin Tarantino, I'm thinking of the one with the hitman and the luggage. Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
There's something really deeply disturbing if you look at it.
Totally. Tarantino can definitely be disturbing.
But, there's something deep down inside me that wants to watch it for some reason. I think it's the same thing with, even with porn in people, there's just something that they just want to... I mean, that's a bad example, obviously.
I think it gets to the same... Well, it also can come back to that exploitative thing, you know what I mean? Where where's the line most people are willing to draw for entertainment and shock value since I forgot the word. What's the word?
Sensationalism?
Sensationalism, yeah. Where's the line people are willing to draw for those kinds of things? And as a creator, especially in the creative sense, for movies, graphic novels, books, where do you draw that line, as an individual?
That's a good question.
That is a good question. I think for me, so this is something that comes up a lot when I think about my writing too. So, I think a lot of it comes down to lived experience. If you can speak to your own, if something that you create is something that you went through something that was hard, and then you can claim it and stand by it, and you're not just co-opting someone else's experience for the sake of sensationalism, right? Mm-hmm. So I think I think that's where I would draw that line.
Was there a way, I guess the follow-up to that, and I feel the necessary one, especially in terms of being the creative making works, when you're, because especially being a creative writer, I feel both of us can relate to this. Mm-hmm. You want to write something intriguing. You want to write something actionful. I love writing violence in my stuff because people like watching fights and stuff. Mm-hmm. So where in instances like that, where do you feel the line gets drawn? How much gore is too much? How much blood is too much?
Well, then that goes back to our question of taste earlier, because I think gore. I mean, that's a whole. I mean, yeah. I think. I think I enjoy horror comedy personally. Mm-hmm. I don't mind gore that's ridiculous. And,
you are an Evil Dead kind of person, aren't you? Yeah, I know you are.
I don't. Actually, I have to admit, ignorance to that one too. That I never.
What?
Crossed. I know.
Wow. Yeah, especially with that statement.
With that statement, yeah.
Okay, gotta do my homework. Yeah. But yeah, no, I like Shaun of the Dead. As one.
Shaun of the Dead is probably top 3 movies of all time for me.
Oh, really?
It is.
Oh, wow.
In my opinion, one of the most perfect horror comedies. But that's a really gory movie. It is. Times.
Yeah.
But do you think it's done in a way that's purposeful?
I mean, yes, I do. Yeah. I mean, if you think of I agree with you. It's an excellent movie, and that opening scene where like everybody's shuffling. They're not zombies yet, but they're shuffling along with their cell phones. Like that movie's making a lot of statements, and
that was like the first 5 minutes,
right? And then later it gets to the gore, and you need that extremity of gore and violence to make its point like really drive home. Like it's fine for me. I don't know, but taste. What do you know?
But like if it wasn't, I guess if it didn't mean something, then what would you think of it then? Like if there wasn't
everything
like
means something, right?
That's not true. Have you watched literally the Room with Tommy Wiseau? There's no meaning behind that movie.
Yeah, that movie.
Oh, I never saw. That's that like camp. Like,
I did not hit her. It's not through. It did not hit her. I did not.
It's literally.
Is that the terrible movie that everybody's like a cult?
It's just bad. And,
it's just bad. Yeah.
But the thing is there's nothing happening in the movie. Like
right.
There's no plot, there's no narrative, there's no arc. Things just kind of happen. But people love to watch it. Whether to shit on it or not, people love to watch it. So I guess, you can have things like violence and gore and comedy without any real purpose, but is there a line to draw if you don't? And is there a line to draw if you do?
I think that maybe that gets back to the earlier question of just like genre expectations. Like I think in like what the audience expects to see, because like I don't think that because I believe in public discourse and criticism, but I don't believe in censorship. So I think people should be allowed to make what they want to make, and then people can talk about it, and the culture can say that's too far or not.
Well, what about, like, I don't know, because you say public, you don't believe in censorship, but what if, like, movies, like, I think two movies that come into mind are Birth of a Nation.
Oh, that's a good point.
And also, Triumph of the Will, the Hitler
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well,
like, should you be, distributing?
Yeah, freedom of speech, and oh my God. Yeah, that was a whole other can of worms.
But it's interesting because that can of worms is essential to those questions of like, how much gore in a movie is too much gore. It's the same question, just now you're asking it in a different lane, I guess.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like if it's like propaganda, I mean, I think propaganda is like a good thing and very like, especially if you look at the propaganda of the Russian, like it's beautiful. I love the signs that they did, the art that they did.
Sure, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and we had propaganda in the U.S. too during the 30s, like the WPA.
We've had propaganda.
Those were racist, though.
What?
Those were racist, though.
Were they?
There's this one with
WPA art projects.
Yeah, there's this one with like because we were rounding up Asian people and putting them up in camps. There was like a one where it's like they look like they made Asian people look like devils, and they're pointing out like what's that?
I didn't know about that.
Oh yeah.
But I think it's important to not globalize, because I think there were WPA art projects that were positive.
Yeah.
But absolutely. Like those were awful. So, but that to go back to that question of censorship, that's interesting. Like, yeah, I mean, I definitely don't like stand-up comics who are like, it's free speech, I can say whatever the hell I want. Like I don't want that.
Not Joe Rogan's stand-up comedy.
Oh my God.
I know you're talking about Dave Chappelle, dude.
God. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, maybe. Okay, I don't know. Censorship.
Like, it's one of those things where, like, you start stepping on toes, and you start stepping on everyone's toes, but also some toes do sound like they need to get stepped on, and they do make it pretty obvious when they sound like someone who should. You know what I mean? Like, Birth of a Nation, for example. Like, obviously things that are trying to push, violent and regressive ideas, I think that's pretty commonly, looked down upon, especially in film and literature and stuff. But also, is it necessary to have those things in those spaces for the sake of creative works? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's so complicated, because like, right, like yeah, because, okay, so there's this James Baldwin quote that I love that I always say is like, the purpose of art is to lay bare the questions that have been hidden by the answers, right? So it's like you can't, if you don't know what the questions are yet as an artist, like you have to explore. And if there's too many parameters, then you don't have freedom to explore that. But at the same time, obviously, like the toes thing, like say the toes thing again. What were you saying?
Like if you're, for the example of freedom of speech and all that, obviously some toes need to get stepped on. There are some that are just bad. Inherently, you can see it from a mile away. But when you start doing that for one, you end up stepping on everyone's toes. So do you not step on any, or do you step on all of them? Because, for example, stuff like, leftist content, for example, is extremely monitored by things like the U.S. government, especially in relation to actual political action.
Right.
Even literature gets very easily censored.
Right.
And
I mean, we see this in Florida.
Exactly.
Yeah. So banned books is happening right now. Yeah. I think that's what I was speaking to more than where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. It's like when stuff like that happens, but then you also have far-right, straight Nazi propaganda happening in a lot of places.
Right.
What's, do you say no to one, yes to the other? Or do you say no to both? Do you say yes to both? What's, you know what I mean? Like, is there a combination that can exist, allowing one to exist and not the other?
Well, I think oh, go ahead, sorry.
Without, inherently causing, societal issues, you know what I mean? Because there are people who subscribe to those far-right conspiracies and stuff, and they...
QAnon and
Jewish space lasers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We have people in Congress who believe them, so,
my God. Yeah, I know we have QAnon people in Congress. It's so scary.
Yeah, and they're in, the hundreds, too, so,
I know. Yeah. I mean, I feel like... were you going to say something?
No, don't worry about it.
I don't know. I think it, I don't know how to answer that question completely because I feel like it's so far reaching. A question of how we want to set up our government to, I just think we're in a very dangerous time. so I don't...
Easiest answer to that question.
I don't want to say... yes, oh yeah. I don't, it's a hard time to make a grand statement about that because our country is so divided and so many, of course, I think from a liberal perspective, people are always like, more discourse, but that's not going anywhere. Discourse and discussion and dialogue is breaking down. Yeah. So how do we, I don't know.
Because
Sorry, I'm just getting overwhelmed.
No, it's okay.
I mean, that's kind of what we do to our guests.
That's true. Everyone so far has at one point gone, ooh, that was a tough one.
I just think... I mean, to me, it comes down to questions that I was just talking about with my 230 class teaching the Communist Manifesto.
Hell yeah.
Are we talking about, do we want democratic socialism? Do we want socialism? Do we want communism? Do we want anarchism? And I think these are all central questions of this moment. And something that so there's my class. And then a TikTok I saw on the flip side of that was somebody was talking about what is a revolution. And we always think that a revolution is it happens overnight or it's a 1 year tops type of thing. But when historians go back and look in time, then they identify revolutions in 5 to 10 year periods. So it's is it possible that we're already in a revolution?
I think that that goes back to what I was saying when I did propose the whole revolution-based novel. That is kind of what I was getting at, that central idea that we're at a pivotal moment in what we consider, American history, American politics.
Yes.
And a lot of younger people are, statistically speaking, overwhelmingly on the left.
Yes.
Especially just liberal. And then everything beyond, it's a much higher percentage than on the right. So, you kind of ask that question of okay, well then what do people want from those kinds of things? What do people actually want to see in their material world? Do they want democratic socialism? Maybe they just want straight communism. They don't want to deal with nations and borders anymore. But would everyone want that? That's another big part of it.
But that's where you still have to have discussion to
exactly.
to figure out what you want. And culture and art and creativity is part of what makes us allow to have those conversations. Back to the James Baldwin quote. We don't have the answers yet. We still have to hash it out, But I hear you it does give me a lot of hope what you just said about Generation Z, and roughly Generation Z is a lot of folks on the left. No?
There's a lot of muddiness to it because on the one hand, statistically speaking, you see a lot of more left-leaning people our age, Gen Z. But then on the other hand, you where did the Andrew Tate fans come from?
Yeah.
Because that's exactly, that's the other side of the discussion. Is like you saw a wave, and you saw en masse that people were appealed by this. People were lured in, and they were like, yeah, this is my shit. So like, on the one hand, there's obviously a deep desire, a deep need for like systematic institutional change on not only a national but a global level.
Yes, absolutely.
But then on the other hand, you have people who are still very much indebted to that system, that institution that exists now. And how can art really, I guess, find a way to not necessarily get in the middle of it, but show both sides without, you know, openly condemning and or calling for the elimination of the other?
I think, at least when we talk about art, and especially this era of the internet with Gen Z, because I would have to disagree that Gen Z is even like gonna become better, because the Andrew Tate thing is like a great example of it. Is that we're babies of the internet. I've spent like most of my life on the internet.
Right.
I think T has as well. Have you?
For sure.
Yeah. Like
I got my first phone in the 5th grade.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Like, we haven't lived in a world without the internet. At least I haven't. And the internet's filled with just propaganda, especially with like again, because Tucker Carlson just got fired the other day.
Yep.
That like exactly, great. But we saw like people like racist pieces of shit like go and like convince people, these older people, and we're like, oh, that's not gonna be like us because it's like a television. But like, it's the same thing happening on the internet. It's just we don't see it. Like people like Andrew Tate is a great example of it. Or even I think another one that's like is the Ben Shapiro's and the who are they? Steven Crowder, because he just got divorced also recently. That's very funny. But
I don't know.
I think art. I mean, if I look at like the 90s, for instance, like I think is the best era of music ever to come out, in my opinion.
It's like my high school and college.
Yeah. Like, you have acts like Rage Against the Machine.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
Can't sing their lyrics in this podcast.
Yeah.
No, definitely not.
But I think that we're having that now, like with we could become better because we have artists now who are like Rage Against the Machine or Nirvana that was like, you know, were rebellious against the system and ideas that like are bad, with like artists in hip hop like artists like Kendrick Lamar or whatever. And, yeah. But I don't know. I'm rambling, so.
I think I hear what you're saying. It's like, yeah, music is a powerful force and indicator and barometer of kind of like what the culture is at, you know? And I think, in the 90s were a shift in a way towards a more progressivism. And then I think we had like, a backlash in the 2000s. And like, I think maybe we're at a point right now. I don't know. I'm trying to be hopeful.
Yeah.
No, it's okay.
You're not hopeful because of Andrew Tate? And
no, I think that we can become better. But I don't think we're going to become better based on the trajectory we're going right now, especially with the climate change at the worst it's been right now, and we're not doing crap about it. I don't know.
I know. No, I believe me, I like oscillate wildly between cynicism and hope. Like,
and I think
like I get it.
It's bipolar.
A little bit, yeah.
To speak to something that we talked about before turning on the podcast, Phoebe Bridgers and the ideas of doomerism that keep kind of popping up in especially chronically online people like us. You know, how do you combat that in an artistic sense? Because, you know, someone like Phoebe said that she doesn't want to make that kind of depressing music anymore. But then, you know, she kind of keeps making depressing music.
Doomerism, I like that.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, like, how do you convince a generation of people who grew up seeing, like, the worst things, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you know, I was born 2003. I was born right after 9/11. I grew up watching the war in Iraq.
Right.
And, you know, in middle school, I was reading books written by guys who served in the war. They would detail every war crime they committed. And they were just like, this was the day job.
And we lived through a couple genocides even, like, in the past decade.
Exactly. So,
it's rough.
And I guess the other thing is, like, on a political scale and on a creative scale, how do you measure those things in an artistic way that can be meaningful and concise in the now. Because, you know, we look at things like Rage Against the Machine, Nirvana, and we're like, yeah, those guys were like ahead of their time. They knew what they were talking about years before anyone else really picked up on it on a cultural level. Mm-hmm. You know, can we speed that process up now, given the internet, given what we have access to, the fact that we can get to anyone at any time? Like, is that in the foreseeable future? Or is that just something that's, you know, it's going to take another couple decades before anyone now really catches on to that degree?
Well, I like this idea of kind of like almost like a prophetic power of art, you know, like when you speak about Rage Against the Machine or Nirvana, like it makes me think of, again, in my myth, fantasy, and science fiction class, this author Octavia Butler. Do either of you know her? Yeah. So she's like a science fiction writer. A lot of her work was in the 90s, and she did super prophetic stuff. Like she called it out that there was going to be a president who said "Make America Great Again," like in the 90s. Like she knew that. So like people call her as like a prophet, and people follow her work in such a way as like a roadmap to where we are now. And speaking of climate change, speaking of just like kind of the dissolution of society, you know, and I guess to be honest, like to speak to that optimism, despair thing that I hinge on, to be fully honest, I go back and forth between like, will this world be like saved by big business and the government?
No.
Or will it, thank you, exactly. Or is the grid going to fall apart and we're all just going to like have to like
go back to agriculture-based communities? Yeah.
Honestly, I wrote a short story about that.
Yeah, no, and
actually, wait, real quick, I want to recommend you an album. It's called what's it? It's called Cave World by it's a Viagra Boys. I think you'd like it if you.
That is something they talk about.
Cave World?
Cave World by Viagra Boys.
Okay,
I'll look into it. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyways.
Okay.
I'm sorry that I'm gonna have to cut you off here, but
no worries.
We have to end the pod. I mean, we're gonna start wrapping up right now.
Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to shout out that's upcoming? Any writing, any books, any events? I know you were talking about one with Cindy earlier.
Yeah. When is this gonna air?
Literally today.
Oh, right on. Okay, so next Wednesday in the Unity Center from 2 to 4 p.m. There's going to be a Pride Alliance, the LMC LGBTQ Student Club. They're having a mixer, and they're also working with Office of Equity and Inclusion and with me to present a 20-minute video presentation of a graphic novel that I have been collaborating on with a former student from here, Ana V. Valdez. And so, like, the art is lovely, and I got some friends of mine as actors to play some parts, and it's about, like, I'll tell you the logline really quick. I know you need to go. But the logline is, while searching for an enchanted ink that rewrites history, a queer nun with the sight in medieval Europe falls in love with a gender-fluid swashbuckling nun.
Oh, that's great.
Together, they must battle an ancient prophecy that threatens not just the relationship, but their dignity and identity and the entire world.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, so come through. There's going to be food. And so one of the actors will be there, too. So 218 Unity Center, 2 to 4.
Appreciate it, LD Green.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking with me.
I mean, we would, again, buy their book. If you don't, I'll come to your house. I'll come to your house.
Yeah, it's not out
Doesn't matter. Pre-order it. Pre-order 4. Okay? Anyways, have a lovely day, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, everyone.